Wonderful. And with that, we can get started. Hello, everybody. Good evening. My name is Flavio Diaz. I'm a graduate admissions counselor here for the College of Communication at DePaul University. I want to welcome all of you for tonight's faculty talk, which is titled Lessons from the Dark Web, presented by our esteemed professor, Dr. Adriane Stoner. We host these faculty talks throughout the year to showcase our faculty, their research, and their expertise. We certainly hope that by the end of tonight's talk, you'll feel not only excited about the topic, but also curious about the vast graduate educational opportunities that we offer here at DePaul University. To kick things off, we're also joined tonight by our esteemed professor and director of graduate studies, Dr. Matt Regis, and he will go ahead and deliver some welcome remarks as well as introduce our speaker. So with that, I'll hand things off to Matt.
Thanks very much, Flavio. Hey, thanks everyone for joining us for the next hour or so. I've very much been looking forward to Dr. Sterner's talk on the ins and outs and implications of the dark web. But first, let's talk a little bit about DePaul. And this is actually a hot off the press slide, as the grad admissions team knows. DePaul is the largest private university in the Midwest. We're one of the nation's largest Catholic universities, but we're very inclusive. We have around 21,000 students. The College of Communication is one of 10 colleges and universities here at DePaul. 210,000 alums living in 55 countries. Very, very strong presence, as you can see, in Chicagoland. 300 plus undergrad and graduate programs. We have 5 graduate programs here in the College of Communication. And if you are enjoying kind of going back to school for the next 50 minutes or so, and you are thinking about investing back in yourself, because that's really what grad school is all about, I would love to talk with you. We have 2 associate deans from the college, lots of faculty on the call this evening. You've already met Flavio Diaz and the grad admissions team. We would love to get in touch with you and hear from you and answer your questions. Our students come from all 50 states, more than 100 plus countries, and we have a very high placement rate with our students. Next slide, Flavio. And I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our longtime friend and colleague, Dr. Adriane Stoner. She has been with us. Her expertise on the faculty in communication studies, OrgComm, communication and dating, and the dark web, which we're going to talk about this evening. Adriane earned her PhD from the University of Illinois at Chicago, aka UIC, and I have it on pretty good authority that she is also a yacht rock aficionado. Don't think I'm not going to forget. I'm not going to forget that, Adriane.
I'm
Um,
happy to answer questions about that as well.
yeah, so she'll take questions on that too. If you're not familiar with our college, we are definitely a work hard, play hard, and a very I'd say engaging group of faculty. So we are going to leave some dedicated time towards the end for Q&A with Adriane, but we're also going to be monitoring, doing our best to monitor the chat. So you don't have to sit on your hands to the end. And I know Adriane also has some interactive questions. And with that, we're going to turn the floor over to Adriane. I think she's going to share her slides.
I am. Okay, great. Let's do it.
And we'll also do a little plug for we have a second faculty talk next month, Flavio, right, with Professor Dan Bashara. So we'll talk about that before we go to.
Great. Thanks so much, Matt. Thanks, Flavio. Yeah, welcome to Lessons from the Dark Web. Thanks everyone for coming. I appreciate, everyone taking the time out of their day to listen to sort of what I'm talking about and what I'm doing in the classroom. So I'm interested to hear the questions you have, the thoughts that you have. But yeah, let's dive into it. Okay. And I can't. Okay. So here is sort of the map for this evening, my plan. I'm gonna start out a little bit with just a little bit of background about myself. Talk about what the dark web is, what the dark web isn't. Then issues related to risk, safety, and ethics. And then lastly, I'm going to conclude with some thoughts or ideas about what the dark web can teach us about ourselves and teach us about society. Okay, so about me, I am an instructor in the College of Communication, as you've already heard, and I'm in the Communication Studies program. And within that, I teach a lot of classes within our communication and technology major. I have my PhD from UIC is in communication and technology, and I teach a class on the dark web, CMNS 345. And how that worked and how that came about to be was back in, I want to say 2019, I pitched the class. It was pretty easy to get up and running. And so this is a class that I've been teaching every year since 2019. And you're probably not surprised to hear just because as you all are curious about the topic, it's pretty popular class, and we have some great discussions. And so I get in people because they're interested, and I kind of, over the 10 weeks, we get into some really, really important issues and debates. And I kind of use the dark web as a tool to explore a lot of those different ideas, debates, and things that are going on in society. So I teach both graduate and undergraduate courses within the College of Communication. And within that, I've carved out myself a little space between where interpersonal communication and technology intersect. And so you'll see a lot of that kind of in the ideas and my approach to this particular class. So I'll start with you all and in this talk how I do on the first day of my class when we're meeting for dark web. And that is with a content warning, which I go over and over and over again with my class. So the content warning has to do with a lot of different things. But before I get to that, I will show you on the screen. Here's what students see in the course catalog, which I don't know if hopefully students are looking at the course catalog and reading up on what they're taking. But the course catalog basically says that this is a class about the underworld known as the dark web. It's a secretive network, often maligned, a haven for activities that may or may not be illegal, but are frequently perceived as radical, unethical, or immoral. And so we explore that through the lens of this delicate balance between privacy and protection and freedom and regulation in virtual spaces. So the content warning, which also might be labeled as a trigger warning. And I know that we use that language a lot. Before in the past, I prefer to use the word content warning just to give everyone a heads up about the things that we discuss in the course, we cover in the course, and also things that I'll be talking about this evening. So in the content warning I have on the syllabus, I have on everything. So make sure that no one's sort of stumbling into this, not aware of what we're going to talk about. So the materials within dark web that we talk about, and I try to be extremely straightforward about, I would say the vast majority of things that we touch on are what I would call sensitive topics. So I have a long list. I'll give you a few of the things that we cover. And this is not an exhaustive list, but things that we talk about in this particular class are identity-based discrimination and harassment, close relationship, non-consensual acts and behavior, self-harm, eating disorders, consumption of pornography, sex work, drug abuse, and sexual exploitation of minors. I'm trying to make that as clear as possible on the first day, and I urge students to do their due diligence and to take a look ahead at the content that's in the class, because I know that a lot of these ideas and these topics are difficult to engage with. And so I think we started at a good place in terms of take a look at it. If there's something that you know that you're not going to be comfortable with this class, sort of let me know ahead of time. And so, starting out on that note, I think that it's really helpful having established that tone, that students are maybe more willing to deal with topics that may be stigmatized, maybe taboo, maybe things that you're just not even supposed to say the name or the label. And so I haven't had a lot of, here and there, there's some things that have come up, but I haven't had a lot of issue. And I think with that, we create this environment where we're able to have these really in-depth, great, nuanced conversations about these topics that a lot of the times we shove them sort of under the rug and don't pay attention to them because we think that they're things that we're not supposed to engage with. So that's a little bit about the class. Let's talk about demystifying the dark web and start out with just a couple of questions. First of all, and I think a lot of people sign up for the class without even knowing what the dark web is. And so this is where I'm going to ask you all to help me out here if you can. If you can put into the chat, like we're going to do a little word association activity here. When you hear the words dark web together, what comes to mind?
Seeing a lot of things here. Identity theft. That's
Okay.
pretty timing on that one, Matt.
Yep. Drugs,
Drugs,
dangerous, privacy
dangerous,
data. Yep.
illegal purchases, illegal and dangerous, sinister outcomes. Tor.
Format. Okay. Yeah. I'm
Danger.
seeing illegal, dangerous, danger. People with bad intentions, violent, dangerous, illegal. Yeah, and I don't think that is very far off of scary too. That's and the moral panic associated with the dark web is another interesting thing that I will touch on. But yeah, I think that there is a lot of misunderstanding or just sort of a knowledge gap when it comes to what the dark web actually is. But the association of it, it's very much stigmatized. Um, the most general common association is this is a place where bad and scary things happen. So there are two different ways I'm going to define it for you all. Two different ways. One, there's a moral definition of the dark web, and the second is a technical definition of the dark web. And so in my class, I'll mention this again because it's just a wonderful resource. I assigned to my class the book The Dark Net by Jamie Bartlett that was published in 2014. And Bartlett describes kind of two different ways to think of the dark web. One of it is the moral definition of like the judgment that we place over content that exists on the web. And that can happen on any piece of the web. And then the second part of it is the technical definition. And so the technical definition, while the moral is a little bit more ambiguous and subjective, the technical definition of the dark web is websites that are built with regular technology, standard website technology, but need to be viewed using a particular kind of a browser, and has the special extension, which is the .onion extension. That's the vast majority of sites on the dark web can be identified by the .onion extension. So like DePaul is DePaul.edu, and any commercial places is going to be .com. The .onion is a representative of the onion router. So that's why I have sort of this icon. This icon is for the Tor browser, and Tor is an acronym for the onion router. And there are a couple of different ways and platforms used to access the dark web, but the main one is Tor. And every site that you visit that's on the Tor network is going to have that .onion extension. And they use the onion metaphor simply because of the layers of encryption that the Tor network provides for you. Another question that's really common that comes along with the dark web, and it's a misconception, is the size of the dark web. So oftentimes you see this iceberg imagery. And so that's why I have the picture of the iceberg over here. And it's kind of like the lore is that the dark web is just this huge, expansive, like, oh my gosh, this is just the tip of the iceberg, and all these terrible, horrible things are happening below the surface, which just isn't true and just doesn't reflect reality. So if you break down the internet into 3 different spaces or chunks, you have the clear web or the surface web. And so that's anything that's indexed by Google or the search engine that you're using. There's the deep web, which is anything on the internet that is behind some sort of password protective screen. And then there's the dark net, which is just a tiny, tiny fraction of everything. So, and the numbers here are kind of always changing and it's hard to pin down. But if I were to give numbers to each, the clearer the surface web is probably about 90% of the entire World Wide Web. The deep web is the vast majority of the internet. And again, the deep web is anything that you need a password to get into. So that would be your email. That would be anything that has records to your different accounts. All those things are considered the deep web. And then the dark web, if we're talking about, okay, 9% for the clear web, 90% for the deep web. And then, it's anywhere from like 0.01% to 6% for the dark web. I know that that's a really large range. I think it's on the smaller side of that. But anything with that .onion extension. There's also the Invisible Internet Project, but that's not where the most activity is going on. And I mean, this makes sense if you think about it. The dark web is very much small and ephemeral by nature. So if you think of how we'll think of like big business or big organizations in our economy that can be quote unquote too big to fail. It's the opposite way when we think about organizations, businesses, practices on the dark web. If you're too big, you do fail. Because you need to be small, you need to be inconspicuous, and the larger you get, it kind of often, whether or not it's something that's illegal, the larger you get, it often defeats the purpose of existing on the dark web, and only being able to be accessed by usually a small group of people. Okay, so moving on, how does one access it? Super easy. It's way easier probably than you thought. Everyone right now, and I encourage you to do this, go to torproject.org. And it's as easy as downloading Chrome as a browser. So you can just go to tor.org. You will see their website, and that's also a good resource to tell you a little bit about what the Tor project is all about, gives you the background of all of that. And it's just with a click of a button, you can download Tor and you can get yourself on the dark web. What you do after that, that's another question, and isn't necessarily as straightforward, but it's super easy to download it. So anyone can access it, and anyone can access it anyone who has, internet access and a device to do so, all you have to do is click on it and download it. The next question, who is using it and why? That one is not very straightforward. We saw the associations, and yes, I mean, certainly there are criminals, there are evildoers or bad actors, but I would say the one thing, whether or not you're doing something illegal online or not, the one thing that the people on the dark web have in common are these are individuals who value, and for whatever reason, value their privacy online. Okay, so talking about risk, safety, and ethical tensions. So risky behavior, and I think danger was a word that came up several times when I had people drop words in the chat. So risky behavior, the question that we talk about in my class is whether or not privacy and wanting privacy is a risky behavior or keeping your information private. Is that risky? And why? And another question that I pose to my students is, okay, who benefits from this idea or this narrative that privacy is a risky thing? And so that gets us into a conversation about the government, that gets us into a conversation about big business. And what I really like to emphasize with my students is that wanting privacy does not have to equal you having something to hide or doing something bad. Glenn Greenwald has a great TED Talk called Why Privacy Matters. And our government and big business are slowly chipping away or eroding on this idea that we should want privacy because we deserve privacy in our lives. And instead replace that with the narrative of, if you want privacy, you must be doing something wrong. And you should be an open book, because if you're an open book, the government can benefit from that, as well as obviously big businesses and big tech companies. So we have very little privacy online. Most of us value our convenience over privacy. And in a lot of ways, ignorance is bliss. And so until something bad happens, like the identity theft or something like that, we're not necessarily thinking about our privacy and whether or not that's important to us. But most of the time, the majority of us are not pushing back on any of this surveillance, whether it be by the government or whether it be by big tech companies. And a really important point that I like to emphasize is that this is a very slippery slope. Just adopting this, like we just do it because that's what we do, and not pushing back on when those boundaries keep on being eroded by the powers that be. Is it an unsafe environment? How I would respond to that question, if someone asked me, is the dark web safe or unsafe? I would say that the clear web or the surface web is just as unsafe or safe as the dark web. And because I'm sure we can all think of all these, horrible things happen on the clear web or the deep web, like every second of the day. So I would say, sure, bad things happen on both and good things happen on both. Because with anonymity, we gain privacy, but at the same time, we can lose protection. So we're kind of having to balance those two things that are at odds with one another. So the example for this I would give, sort of when we give up, when we're anonymous, is the Bitcoin example. So if you decide to invest in Bitcoin, that's great. This is a pseudo-anonymous way for peer-to-peer payment, and obviously it's a very popular thing to do. But so say you invest a ton of money into that, you're really into Bitcoin, and then something goes bad and someone hacks into your network and steals the information and therefore is able to take all of your Bitcoin. Okay. Who do you go to with that issue? Who do you complain to? You don't. With that anonymity comes a decrease in protection. But we're just sort of, they're both good things and bad things that come along with that, for sure. So the last part of this is sort of what assumptions are we making about people that are participating in the dark web? And I think something to emphasize over and over again is just because we want privacy and we're using Tor because we want privacy does not make us necessarily a suspect of illegal things. And that also, that idea and internalizing that idea makes it way too easy for big business and authorities to erode those boundaries that we should have in society. And another thing, when we talk about the ethics of participation, we talk a little bit about when we push people and ideas to the fringes, and sometimes to these environments, there can be a lot of bad things that happen with extremist groups that are not necessarily on the platforms that everyone can access. And the other thing that I wanted to note, just another statistic, and statistics are hard. I'm going to use that word with quotes, that like if we're looking at the content supposedly of what is on the dark web by percentage, that usually the number one, the highest percentage of content is linked to illicit drugs, and I'm sure you're not surprised to hear that. And so I think that prompts questions, and really important questions, as to why people would go to the dark web to find drugs that they can't otherwise legally acquire through other channels. And that talks about how do we deal with drugs in the United States? How do we deal with addiction? And so we can kind of put that into sort of a larger conversation about the US and how we have struggled with the war on drugs for decades, and how we do not view addiction usually as a medical condition, but instead are criminalizing it. And then another thing, when we talk about the ethics of participation, another large portion of content on the dark web is child abuse, child exploitation content. So I'm sure that you are familiar with the term or the vernacular of child pornography. And so there's a big push not to use that terminology anymore. I just saw it on the local news like a few days ago. But sort of child pornography versus child exploitative images. In my class, we define pornography as something that is a consensual act that's recorded. And if you're looking at in the context of children, that is an impossibility. So we talk a lot about that, and in terms of child abuse content or child exploitation. And so that conversation also gets us to leads to another conversation where we talk about, in popular culture, how we have the sexualization of minors is everywhere. In my class, we make a list of all the popular songs over time, whether they be recent or from 30 years ago, probably even longer ago than that, that in some way imply or just straight out say something about the sexualization of a minor. And so we kind of talk about that sort of, saying one thing and believing another thing, and how there's some cognitive dissonance there. And then how do we necessarily punish offenders in this area? And because I think the idea of when people are accused of and convicted of exploitative material when it comes to minors, I think the strategy of throw them away and lock away throw them in jail and lock away the key is not necessarily the most productive conversation we can be having on that. Also giving the fact of how prevalent it is, not only on the dark web, but on the clear web as well. Okay, and then my last slide, just kind of an overview of all the different issues that we talk about, and we can get into more detail about, is the bigger, broader conversations that we can and should have on privacy. Should we value, respect, protect privacy, and why? I would argue yes. Even though I'm probably one of the worst offenders when it comes to not taking the steps that I should take to protect my privacy when I'm online. Because again, convenience versus privacy, most of us are going to pick convenience until something really bad happens. Anonymity, what value does the ability to be anonymous have? Obviously, it has drawbacks, but we talk about different people from different countries where there is severe censorship, and how having access to the internet or even the dark web via Tor gives people access to information that really can impact their lives. Free speech. We talk a ton about free speech and how free speech means free speech, and not just speech that we necessarily agree with or doesn't offend us. And so the the important part about that is if we immediately shut down or push to the fringes ideas that we disagree with and we're not willing to engage in those things, that is a recipe for trouble or disaster. And so one thing we talk about, and some of you might remember this from several years ago when Milo Yiannopoulos came and had a speaking engagement at DePaul that got stopped by protesters. And we really kind of get to dig into that as a case study about how, would it be better to these people with these radical or very offensive ideas, can we give them a platform? And what happens when we don't give them a platform and we don't allow them that free speech? So that also sort of bleeds into this idea of extremism. What happens when we do restrict free speech? And then there are plenty of examples of us to draw on from that. And then this last category is just our discussions that we get to have about digital rights and justice and how that is related to surveillance technology and whether or not surveillance technology is ethical, and really who is benefiting from the surveillance technology that's slowly creeping into pretty much every aspect of our lives. So that's it for me in terms of my content, and I'm excited to hear questions from you all. And just again, to reiterate, for additional resources, I would really, really recommend The Dark Net by Jamie Bartlett. It was published in 2014, and I always give my spiel about like, I know at this point this book is more than a decade old, and especially with communication and technology, obviously things change at a very, very rapid pace. If there's another, it is such a good book that there has yet to be anything that comes close to the level of academic value, philosophical value that this book has. It reads much more like a novel, even though it's Jamie Bartlett basically talking to different people and different actors on the dark web. It's a great resource, and I'm always on the lookout for more resources. So please, if there's anything that anybody else knows about, I'd love to hear it.
So, folks, we're going to open it up, Flavio, for questions. And if you have a question, you can raise your emoji hands, or you can put your question directly into the chat, and then we will get a bit of a queue going, and we'll call on you. So we'll give a moment. Think about questions. You can raise your emoji hand. You can even then throw your camera on or not, depending. Hopefully you're not. Don't do that if you're driving. You can also throw stuff in the chat. I'll kick us off, Adrian. I have a question. I think it would fit under one of your categories about sort of digital rights, and I just looked up real quickly, thinking about like this White House, and there were some pardons. I think the Silk Road founder, like early last year, was pardoned, and I don't know if you're following that, but I wonder, like, in
Yes.
terms of the bad actors, what's going on these days in terms of law enforcement, and versus
Yeah.
kind of us having to fend for ourselves a bit?
Yeah. So you are referencing Ross Ulbright, who was the mastermind behind the original Silk Road. And so my dates are never perfect. But I want to say around 2000, it was 2014. I want to say 2014 when the Silk Road um, really started to take off. There's an entire movie about this that's been dramatized called, I think it's called The Dark Net. So Ross Ulbright was this guy who was a really, really smart guy. I think he had has a master's degree in engineering, and he, figured out how to basically make an Amazon online for illegal drugs and other things. There's a very large, like, fake IDs, a lot of things that, are on a market, on an illegal market. And so basically, he just put up the infrastructure and it exploded in popularity. And like I was saying before, it was growing so big and so fast that it was really only a matter of time before it got seized and taken down by the authorities. And it's a very long and detailed story. It's a very fascinating one to follow Ross's story. Ross was then kind of made a scapegoat for this entire thing, even though he never dealt the drugs himself. Like he never handled the transaction. He created the platform where people did. So he was thrown in jail for like 2 life sentences or something like that. He was never convicted of a violent crime, but he was thrown in jail, and it was this whole story about how this guy who is, this mastermind behind this quote unquote like very successful business is rotting away in jail. Fast forward to last year, because it was when I was teaching this class. And when Trump got back into office again, Trump decided, for whatever reason, to pardon Ross Ulbricht. So now he is out doing his thing. I have reached out to him hoping that he would talk to my class, but he probably has other things to do. But it's a really, really interesting example of, I think, kind of throwing the book at someone to make the point of like, this is not okay, and make an example of Ross, because I don't think that the punishment fit the crime. But there's a whole debate that we could have on that.
Thank you. Adrian's had some VIP guest speakers in her classes. She will reach out to pretty much. She's got some big hitters.
You never know. You never know. You got to shoot your shot.
You
Yeah.
got to. You got to. We're gonna go to I think Dr. Paul Booth, and then we'll just take the questions in order in the chat room. Hey, Paul.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Adrian. This was
Yeah.
fabulous. Really, really informative. I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit about how some of the students have responded in class or out of class to just like some of the things that they've found on the dark web.
Well, so in the first week, we talk about how easy it is to access Tor. And I more than encourage them to do that. But I do not tie it to any assignment that you have to go on to the dark web and engage with the dark web. And I thought that through that several different times. I know a lot of students do, and they start kind of poking around in there, but then I know there's also a lot of apprehension that comes with that. So that being said, I always, on week 10, which is the last week of the class, we as a group go on the dark web together, which is our dark web field trip. So what I'll do is, hook up my computer and I can broadcast it, and I can say, like, here are some sites that we can look through. And, it's the usual suspects that you would think, like you can pull up an illegal drug market. So I don't know that people have necessarily stumbled onto things that they've shared with me necessarily. But I think when we dig into the topics a little bit more, people are surprised to hear, a lot of the stuff that does exist, not only on the dark web, but on the clear web as well. People are always sort of shocked to hear, anything that has to relate to the illegal markets, and specifically the sale of body parts over the illegal markets. Everyone just like that always seems to come up. And while I am 100% sure that happens, I don't know that that is happening as regularly as one would think. So they haven't spent a lot of time, talking about what they found. And I don't know. Maybe that's something that they don't feel comfortable sharing, but maybe not, maybe not. The whole thing is to encourage them to go on and see what it is and sort of try to decrease the stigma. But that being said, I don't make anyone log on and like, here's your assignment, go on to this drug market and buy some fill in the blank. But they do have the knowledge of how to do that after being in the class.
So, Adrian, we've got it looks like four more questions for
Okay.
you. I apologize to folks if I'm missing anyone. I just tried to go through the chat, and we're going to take them in order, and I'm going to read them out, and then we'll please unmute yourself and feel free to chime in if you want to elaborate a little bit more on your question.
Mhm.
Let's see. We're going to go with Edward. Hey, Edward, it's good to see you, my friend. Your question, what key aspects of the dark web are most germane to modern public relations? And full disclosure, Adrian, Edward is a PR guy.
Okay, so yeah, I was wondering if we were talking about specifically PR as sort of a field or academic field. Okay, so how does this link to PR? Um, in the first couple of weeks of class, this is one way to answer it. In the first couple of weeks of class, we talk about that the dark web kind of needs a rebrand in a lot of different ways because again, we think dark web, we think all these horrible things, but the dark web and the Tor network and the .onion sites really have a lot to offer with privacy and anonymity. And so usually, since this is a communication class, usually I have a few Prad students. So we put that out into that idea out into the group and I put them into pairs. And I asked students like, if you were in charge of rebranding the dark web, how would you spin it? And I think the question the responses that we usually get have to do with, the elevation of like what's important here and what is valuable here is that we have privacy when we're online. And I just even think that connecting that idea of privacy should have a lot of value where necessarily it doesn't, is this idea or perspective that I really would like to push on anybody that I'm talking to the dark net about. It's just it can be a very powerful thing, but I think people are apprehensive to even go there, given the reputation that it has.
So I think our next question is from, and my apologies, I'm mispronouncing, Bagwan. Do you want to take that one, Flavio? I don't know. I can read it out, or do you see it?
Sure thing. So the question is, how does the dark web work under government regulations and ICT policies?
Yeah, and I feel like this was part of it that I must have skipped over. But Tor, the onion router, was created by the US military. So to kind of back up a little bit, it was created by US Naval Research Projects in the 1990s. And essentially, it was so that while military operations were happening abroad, they could stay anonymous because military operations, when they're communicating with one another within the United States, the government can surveil that and have control over that to a larger extent. And so they wanted to create a decentralized network to when people in the military were abroad, they could communicate in a way that was anonymous and private. So the government created it, and it wasn't until a couple of decades later where Tor became open source and anyone could access it, anyone could get into it, and the whole point of that was to make the network larger, because it's easier than in the larger network for privacy. The more different places you can bounce your IP address off of, and the more servers that are contributing to this network, the bigger it is, and the easier it is then to hide within this network, if that makes sense.
And our next question is from Stefania, and they ask, what protections do you talk about for kids? So the question is, I guess, what protections do you talk about for kids as it relates to maybe your dark web class, Adrian?
Um, I think in terms of, so I'm going to answer this in terms of like exploitative content because we don't necessarily, well, we do talk a little bit about children being able to access this content. So I don't know if the question is children being able to access the content or children being sort of the source of content. But protections for kids, we talk a lot about how um, exploitative images and abuse images end up online and sort of what authorities are trying to do to crack down on those rings. But just like with anything else on the dark web, you're kind of like playing whack-a-mole, whether it be with those rings of explicit, um, of non-consensual, exploitative content of children or illegal drug markets. As soon as you close one down, someone else, another one pops up somewhere else. So we talk about law enforcement and their role in it, but due to the nature of the network. It's really hard to be rid of that.
So we're going to go to our next question from a master's in professional communication, one of our 5 grad programs here in the college alum, Caitlin. Do you wanna take that one, Flavio?
Sure thing. Caitlin asks, what are some positive or constructive examples of something to be accessed on the dark web? And I also had the same question. Looks like a few people had this question.
Yeah, so something that, and it's an interesting exercise also to just Google like what sites should I look up on Tor. And that's something you could do, but a lot of the times that list, like sites are constantly put up and taken down. But there are some that are there and are stable and stay there. Simply they're there so that people from countries where their access to different information is censored, so that they can have a way to get that information. So, ProPublica, which is a nonprofit news source, they have a dark web site, and then that's there to exist so that people can access it even from places where information and news like that is being censored. So that's a good example. I mean, there are different ones where at one point, Facebook, this is obviously a dated example. Facebook had a dark website. And again, it's so people could access it from countries who didn't allow them access for it. So that's something that we take for granted in the United States. And so I think looking from it from that perspective, obviously shows us that it can have a lot of value for people who are logging on from places where they're very limited in the content that they can see.
So Flavio, I think I saw one more question that was in the chat since the queue. That was, do we see it, Adrian? I thought there was.
Ken asked
Yes.
the site, but we answered in the chat. It's TOR.
Yeah, Tor,
Or
and you can find it. It's a TOR project, so TORPROJECT.org. And it tells you about the history of Tor. It tells you the different organizations and entities that, because Tor is run by volunteers, and those are the volunteers that volunteer processing power and servers so that the network can run. Because in order for the network to run and to run the Tor relays, you need a lot of different nodes in the network to bounce off the message from one to the other being encrypted one by one along the way. So again, that's why it went to open source. The more people and the more entities in that sense that could be involved, the larger the network could be, and therefore the higher level of anonymity you can have, the harder it is then it's not 100% anonymous, because there are ways that would be, it's near possible, but there are ways of sort of tracing it back to the origin. But the more people that you have running those Tor relays, and the more different points in which the message can be encrypted, the safer it is, the more private it is, the less likely you're going to find out where that information is coming from.
Great. We also have a question from our very own Andre Lewis, who asks, where do you see meaningful gaps in current dark web scholarships that would be appropriate for graduate students to explore without simply reproducing existing narratives about crime and deviance?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And we just talked about this the other day, because I have another book that I use. There's another book called Weaving the Dark Web by Robert Gale. It's a much more dense academic text. But if you think about it and you think of both of these, they're essentially ethnographic projects that both of these authors have done, Jamie Bartlett and Robert Gale. But if you think about it from a research standpoint, it's not very easy to gain access to these individuals or to these networks, and that's by design. In that, if you're on the dark web, you really value privacy. And if you really value privacy, you're probably pretty apprehensive to tell a researcher however, noble their efforts are to learning about the network, you're probably very apprehensive to tell them anything because it is very secretive by nature. So carrying out any sort of project and research on the dark web, you have trouble with access for sure. And just being able to gain access and talk to people is like a huge hurdle. And on top of that, it's just finding the people first to talk to, because you could start working on something and say have some leads on this dark market, and you could turn around the next day and it would be gone. So you're definitely chasing a moving target, which makes it really hard. And I think that's another one of the reasons why we don't see a ton of great literature. But if you were to look into the different areas, things that we talk about in my class, whether it be drug markets, or sex work or exploitative content, I think narrowing the search a little bit, you would have better odds of showing like a piece of what happens on the dark net within. I mean, I refer to them as topics because those are the things that we cover throughout the term. But I think instead of trying to cast a wide net, simply looking into different pieces of it, you're gonna probably be more successful. But even then, it's a very daunting thing to have to study. Like I was telling my students, like, is it easier to send out a survey to, 1,000 people and get that back and crunch the numbers, or to like try to track down people who are running dark web websites? So it doesn't, like, from a researcher's point of view, it's not very efficient. It would take a really long time and a lot of effort. And as we know, the dynamics of how research works, especially within academics, it just doesn't usually make a whole lot of sense.
Well,
But it
Adriane,
would be great if it did.
this has been a great dive this past hour into the dark web, and we're very appreciative of your time and expertise, and for everyone taking the time out to join us. It's fantastic to see so many DePaul alums joining us. If you've enjoyed the past hour of going back to school and are thinking about leveling up, investing in yourself with a grad degree, our information's in the chat. I also shared in the chat Dr. Stoner's information if you'd like to continue the conversation. And I'm going to throw it back to Flavio because we do have another faculty talk that I think is a fascinating topic coming up next month. Flavio, can you tell us a little bit more?
Sure thing. I have it up here on the screen with a nice interactive QR code. If you have your phone, you can go ahead and scan that and sign up for our upcoming talk on Thursday, February 26th. And that's going to be with Dr. Daniel Bashara. And the title of that talk is Against Realism, Weird Cinema and the Power of Uncertainty. So if you like cinema, media studies, or you're just curious in the topic, please go ahead and join us. And with that, we can go ahead and conclude our faculty talk for the evening. Thank you again all for joining, and we really hope that you remain connected